On the SAT reading section, you have 65 minutes to complete 5 passages. That's about 13 minutes per passage, and each passage has about 10 to 11 questions. That's a lot to do in such a limited amount of time, so here are some tips. If you're really struggling to finish the entire section within time, know that you can skip and guess on an entire passage and still get a really good score. You shouldn't complete the passages in order. Prioritize the passages that you feel most confident on and save whatever passages you struggle with for last. Finally, watch this video on how to increase your reading speed. Here are my top 3 tips for the SAT reading section. First, prioritize the passages that you feel most confident on. For example, I saved global conversation passage for last because, Second, you have to read. It's the reading section. So make sure you're actively reading. Something that I do is I try to translate the passage into my own words while I'm reading. Third, try to anticipate the answers in your own words before you look at the answer choices. The SAT deliberately words answer choices in a way that is confusing, so if you have an answer choice in mind, it makes it easier to find the correct answer. On the SAT reading section, the first passage is always a fiction story. You should always read the blurb. Check out the date in the blurb. Older passages tend to be harder, so consider saving them for last. Sometimes the blurb will also introduce the main characters, so if it does, circle them. Every fiction passage will either be about how a character changes or how one character is different from the other. So the key to understanding these passages is to find that point of contrast or that point of evolution. The 3rd and 5th passages on the SAT reading section will be natural science passages, which are about earth science, biology, physics, space, etc. The key to understanding natural science passages is to find the hypothesis. A hypothesis is the researcher's theory that they're trying to test out. The rest of the passage will describe an experiment or study that tests out the hypothesis and either proves or refutes it. So make sure you find that hypothesis and really understand it. Today I'm going to give you an overview of the trickiest passage on the SAT reading section. You can identify global conversation passages by the date in the blurb. Global conversation passages were usually written before 1920. Because they were written so long ago, the language is often dense and challenging to understand, so it's a good idea to save these passages for last. The 3 most common topics you'll see on global conversation passages are women's rights, government, and African American rights. The global conversation passage is also usually a double passage. Ouch! So if that's the case, one passage will be like pro women's rights or whatever the topic is, and the other passage will be against. So when you see a global conversation passage, my advice is to save it for last. Double passages appear both on the SAT and the ACT. Some students find double passages to be a little more time-consuming or harder, but here are some steps to make double passages easier. The questions go in order. First, you'll see questions about the first passage. Then, you'll see a group of questions about the second passage. Finally, you'll see questions that ask about both passages. Use this to your advantage and read one passage at a time. Read passage 1, then answer questions about passage 1. Next, read passage 2, and answer questions about passage 2. Finally, answer the remaining questions at the end that ask about both passages. To become a really high scorer on the SAT reading section, you have to be able to think of the answer in your own words. Let's tackle question 12, which asks what Hossick's description of Scotland suggests. I am a foreigner. I was born among the rugged but free hills of Scotland, a land, sir, that never was conquered, and where a slave never breathed. Let a slave set foot on that shore and his chains fall off forever, and he becomes what God made him, a man. Reading that, I would say that Hossick feels very prideful talking about freedom in Scotland. Looking at the answer choices, answer B is closest to the answer that we anticipated, and that is the correct answer. When you have a line reference, you should always go back to the passage and read not only the line reference, but also the surrounding lines for context. So let's read. The Americans felt themselves in such a state of infancy that as a child just learning to walk, they were afraid of their own movements. Now read the question. The image of the child just learning to walk in line 7 mainly serves to... Now, we'll anticipate the answer without looking at the answer choices. The vibe I'm getting here is of a child that is unsure and having a new experience. We can see that answer B is closest to the answer we anticipated, and that is the correct answer. Don't make this mistake on the SAT reading section. A trap answer is one that looks really appealing, but is actually there to trick you. For words in context questions like the one above, the trap answer is the most obvious answer. Basically, it's the first definition that comes to mind when you look at the word. For example, the first thing that I think of when I see the word charge is charging money. So I'm going to eliminate C and D. In the original sentence, Lady Carlotta was impressively introduced to the nature of the charge. Of the remaining answer choices, it wouldn't make sense for her to be impressed by an attack, so the answer must be responsibility. In short, remember that the most obvious definition is almost always a trap answer, so you should eliminate it. A quarter of questions on the SAT reading section test your ability to find evidence in the passage to support an answer or a conclusion, so this is an extremely important skill. To answer these questions, go back to the passage and read each piece of evidence and see if it answers the question. For example, here, the question asks us to support the conclusion that Mr. Peters wants to attract attention. Let's read option A. Apparently, he himself was not aware that there had been any change. That doesn't show that Mr. Peters is trying to attract attention, so we can eliminate it. Reading option B, it says, he gestured with it so that the two women at the next table would notice the diamond ring on the fourth finger of his right hand. Well, that does show he's trying to attract attention, so the correct answer is B. Let's tackle this SAT reading question. The question asks for the author's attitude toward farming. Let's read the passage and try to figure out if the author's attitude is positive, negative, or neutral. The passage uses the highlighted words above to describe farming. Power, saving human lives, dream. These are all positive words. So we can eliminate apprehension and ambivalence because these are not positive words. We can also eliminate astonishment because that means surprised, and the passage doesn't indicate surprise. So the correct answer is C, appreciation. When answering a graph question on the SAT reading section, you don't always have to read the passage. So here, we can just focus on the figure. According to figure 1, the percent increase in the activity of the PCC in subjects reacting to a scenario in which someone has a conversation with a real person is approximately. So here, we can eliminate these two bars because those are for fictional characters. Now we're just focusing on the first two bars, and it's a conversation. A conversation is an interactive scenario. So we're looking at the black bar, which is here. So the percent change in activity is somewhere between 0.1 and 0.15, so C is the correct answer. On the SAT reading section, you can confidently eliminate answer choices that are too strong. Consider answer choice B. Do you think it's likely that the brain stores information about famous real people exactly as it stores information about close friends or family members? Probably not. So if you see words like exactly or other really strong words, eliminate those answer choices.